The market square of Valerian was louder than usual that afternoon. It was harvest day, and the entire kingdom seemed to have gathered inside the ancient stone walls of the capital. Long rows of stalls filled the square. Bright fabrics hung from wooden frames. The smell of roasted meat, fresh bread, and sweet fruit drifted through the air. Merchants shouted over one another. Fresh apples. Sweetest in the kingdom. Handmade blades. Stronger than royal steel. Children darted between the crowd, laughing as they chased one another through the maze of people. Near the fountain in the center of the square stood a small boy with messy brown hair and curious eyes. His name was Daniel. He was 7 years old. And at that moment, he was staring in amazement at a wooden puppet show. A traveling performer was making a tiny dragon puppet breathe sparks of glittering powder, sending the nearby children into bursts of laughter. Daniel clapped happily. Again, he shouted. The puppeteer bowed dramatically and prepared another trick. That was when the sunlight vanished. At first, no one noticed. A shadow slowly crept across the market square, swallowing the bright colors of the stalls and dimming the golden afternoon light. A merchant looked up. His smile disappeared instantly. The basket of fruit slipped from his hands and crashed onto the stones. Dragon. The word left his mouth as a whisper. But the next voice screamed it. Dragon. The entire square erupted into panic. People shoved past one another. Children cried. Stalls collapsed as merchants abandoned their goods and ran for cover. Above the city walls, something enormous descended from the clouds. A dragon. Its wings stretched wider than the palace gates. Black scales shimmered like polished obsidian in the sunlight. Each powerful wing beat thundered through the sky like a storm. The creature circled once above the city. Then it began to descend. The guards reacted instantly. Archers, the captain roared. Soldiers rushed to defensive positions around the square. Bows lifted. Spears lowered. The dragon landed in the center of the market with a thunderous crash that shook the ground. Stone cracked beneath its claws. Dust rose into the air. The creature was enormous, far larger than any dragon recorded in the kingdom's histories. Its long neck lifted slowly as golden eyes scanned the terrified crowd. But something was strange. The dragon did not roar. It did not breathe fire. It simply watched. The guards hesitated. Why isn't it attacking? One whispered. No one had an answer. The dragon began to walk. Each step echoed across the silent square. Claws scraped against stone. The massive creature moved slowly through the scattered crowd as people backed away in terror. Its head turned. Left. Right. As if it were searching for something. Then its gaze stopped. The dragon began walking directly toward the fountain. Toward a small boy. Daniel. Everyone nearby screamed. Move the child. Run. But Daniel didn't move. He stood frozen beside the fountain, staring at the creature towering above him. The dragon lowered its enormous head. Its golden eye, larger than a shield, focused on the tiny human standing before it. Daniel's heart pounded. He had heard stories about dragons all his life. Fire. Destruction. Death. But this one didn't look angry. It looked curious. The dragon slowly lowered its snout until it was only inches from him. The crowd held its breath. Archers pulled their bowstrings tight. One arrow could start a war. Daniel swallowed nervously. Then, before anyone could stop him, he stepped forward. Gasps exploded across the square. No. But the boy simply raised his tiny hand and gently touched the dragon's nose. Time seemed to freeze. The dragon did not move. For one terrifying moment, the entire kingdom waited for the creature to snap its jaws shut. But it didn't. Instead, the dragon's massive eye blinked slowly. Almost softly. Then the creature carefully lifted the boy. Not with its claws, but with surprising gentleness. Daniel suddenly found himself placed on top of the dragon's broad back. The market erupted into chaos. The dragon stole the child. Stop it. Archers released their arrows. But the dragon spread its enormous wings. A single thunderous beat sent a blast of wind across the square, knocking soldiers off their feet. The arrows clattered harmlessly against the creature's scales. With another powerful wing beat, the dragon rose into the sky. Higher. Higher. Daniel clung tightly to the dragon's scales as the city shrank beneath him. The people of Valerian could only watch in horror. The dragon climbed into the clouds. And disappeared. Taking the human child with it. The kingdom believed they had just witnessed a kidnapping. But none of them knew the truth. The dragon had not come for destruction. It had come for something far more unexpected. The wind roared in Daniel's ears as the dragon climbed higher into the sky. Below him, the kingdom of Valarin shrank rapidly. The great stone walls became tiny gray lines. The market square where he had been standing only moments ago disappeared into a blur of rooftops. Daniel clung tightly to the dragon's scales. They were warm beneath his hands, far warmer than he expected. The boy squeezed his eyes shut as the creature soared through thick white clouds. For a moment, he wondered if he would fall. But strangely, he didn't. The dragon's broad back had a natural ridge of scales, almost like a saddle. It made it possible for Daniel to hold on without slipping. Still, his heart pounded like a drum. This is a dragon, he thought. Dragons eat people. At least, that's what every story in Valarin said. But the dragon had not tried to hurt him. It had not roared. It had not breathed fire. It had simply taken him. The dragon continued flying for a long time. They crossed over deep forests where ancient trees stretched like a green ocean to the horizon. They flew over rivers that glimmered like silver ribbons under the sun. Eventually, the land began to change. The forests thinned. Mountains rose from the earth like jagged teeth. Tall, cold, silent. Daniel had never seen mountains like these before. The dragon finally slowed. Its wings beat slower as it descended toward the tallest peak. At the very top of that mountain stood a massive opening carved into the rock. A cave. The dragon landed with a deep rumbling thud that echoed across the mountain. Snow scattered across the stone. Daniel carefully slid down from the dragon's back, his legs trembling as they touched the ground again. The wind was cold up here. Very cold. He wrapped his arms around himself and looked around. The mountain peak was empty. There were no villages. No roads. No people. Just the dragon, and its cave. The dragon lowered its head toward him again. Daniel stiffened nervously. But the creature didn't open its mouth. Instead, it gently nudged him toward the cave entrance. Almost like it was guiding him. Daniel hesitated. Okay, he muttered quietly. He stepped inside. The cave was enormous. Far bigger than the market square back home. Golden light from the sunset poured through the cave entrance, illuminating mountains of treasure scattered across the floor. Daniel's eyes widened. Gold coins. Ancient swords. Shields covered in strange symbols. Glittering gemstones the size of apples. The dragon's hoard. Daniel slowly walked deeper into the cave. But something about the place felt strange. It wasn't the treasure. It was the silence. Then he noticed something else. Along the far wall of the cave sat several massive nests made of stone and woven branches. They were huge. Far bigger than any bird nest. And every single one of them was empty. Daniel walked closer. Broken pieces of eggshell lay scattered around the nests. Some shells were cracked. Some were shattered. The boy knelt beside one of them. It was almost as big as his head. "What happened here?" he whispered. Behind him, the dragon slowly entered the cave. Its massive body filled the entrance, blocking the wind and cold air. The dragon walked toward the nests. Then it lowered its head beside one of them. Daniel turned. The creature looked different now. Not terrifying. Not angry. Something else. Its golden eyes rested on the empty nests. And for the first time, Daniel noticed something he never expected to see on the face of a dragon. Sadness. The dragon gently pushed something toward him with its snout. A single broken eggshell. Daniel stared at it. Then he looked back at the empty nests. Understanding slowly dawned on him. "You had babies," he said softly. The dragon didn't move. Its tail curled quietly around the nests. Protectively. Daniel looked around the cave again. Every nest was empty. Every eggshell broken. The dragon had lost its children. All of them. The boy felt a strange ache in his chest. He remembered the stories about dragons destroying cities. Burning armies. But the creature standing before him didn't look like a monster. It looked like something else entirely. Something lonely. Daniel slowly walked toward the dragon. The creature watched him carefully but didn't move. When he reached it, the boy placed his small hand gently against the dragon's warm scales. "It's okay," Daniel said quietly. "I'm here." The dragon lowered its head slightly. Almost like it understood. And for the first time since the dragon had taken him from the city, Daniel wasn't afraid anymore. High above the world, on a lonely mountain peak, a dragon and a human child sat quietly together in a silent cave. Neither of them knew it yet. But far below, the kingdom of Valarin was already preparing an army. Because they believed the dragon had stolen a child. And they were coming to take him back. By nightfall, the entire kingdom of Valerin knew what had happened. The story spread faster than wildfire. A dragon had descended into the capital. It had landed in the center of the royal market. And in front of hundreds of witnesses, it had taken a human child. Panic gripped the city. Church bells rang across the kingdom, their deep echoes rolling through the streets like thunder. Torches burned along the walls as guards doubled their patrols. Inside the royal palace, the great war chamber was filled with shouting voices. Nobles argued. Generals slammed fists against the massive oak table. Mags whispered urgently among themselves. At the head of the room sat King Aldrich, ruler of Valerin. His face was dark with fury. "A dragon steals a child from my capital," the king said slowly. "In front of my people." His hand tightened around the armrest of his throne. "And you expect me to do nothing?" The Royal War Council fell silent. General Marcus Hale, commander of the kingdom's armies, stepped forward. "We are already preparing the forces, Your Majesty," he said. Scouts tracked the creature's direction. It flew toward the northern mountains. The king's eyes narrowed. The Frostfang Range. Marcus nodded grimly. "Dragons have nested there before." One of the court mags spoke up nervously. "Your Majesty, dragons are not ordinary beasts. A creature that large could destroy an entire army." King Aldrich stood. His chair scraped loudly against the stone floor. "And if we do nothing," the king demanded, "do we simply allow monsters to take our children whenever they please?" No one answered. The king turned to his generals. "Prepare the army." The command echoed through the chamber. "We march at dawn." Outside the palace, the city was already transforming. Blacksmiths worked through the night. Hammers struck glowing steel again and again as weapons were sharpened for battle. Soldiers gathered in the barracks. Armor was strapped on. Swords were tested. Horses were prepared for war. This was no ordinary hunt. This was a dragon hunt. At the edge of the city, an elite unit of soldiers stood beside a group of magnificent creatures chained to iron posts. Griffins. Massive winged beasts with the bodies of lions and the heads of eagles. Their golden feathers shimmered under torchlight as they screeched impatiently. Only the kingdom's best knights were allowed to ride them. If the dragon could fly, then the army would meet it in the sky. Nearby, the royal mags prepared their own weapons. Ancient spell books lay open on stone tables. Glowing runes floated in the air. Fire resistance charms. Shield spells. Binding magic. They prepared everything they could. Because no one had faced a dragon in nearly a century. And those who had, rarely survived. In the quiet streets of Valerin, frightened citizens gathered in small groups. Whispers filled the air. "Did you see it? They say the dragon was bigger than the palace." "Poor boy. Do you think he's still alive?" No one knew. Near the fountain in the market square, the puppet performer sat quietly beside his broken stage. The same place where the dragon had landed. Where the child had touched its nose. The man shook his head slowly. "I saw the boy," he murmured. A nearby merchant looked at him. "What about him?" The puppeteer frowned. The dragon didn't look angry. The merchant scoffed. "It's a dragon. They're always angry." But the performer wasn't so sure. "I've seen animals before they attack," he said quietly. "That dragon wasn't hunting." The merchant shrugged. "Then why did it take the boy?" The puppeteer looked up toward the distant mountains. "I don't know." By dawn, the army of Valerin stood ready outside the city gates. Thousands of soldiers filled the valley. Spears gleamed in the rising sunlight. Banners snapped in the cold morning wind. Rows of griffin riders waited at the front of the formation. Behind them stood the royal mags, their staffs glowing faintly with magical power. King Aldrich rode to the front of the army on a towering white warhorse. His voice carried across the valley. "Yesterday, a dragon dared to enter our kingdom." The soldiers listened in silence. "It dared to steal a child from our people." Anger spread through the ranks. "We will bring that child home." A roar of approval erupted from the army. King Aldrich raised his sword toward the northern mountains. "And if the dragon stands in our way?" The blade flashed in the sunlight. "We slay it." The war horn sounded. Deep. Powerful. The army of Valerin began marching north. Across forests. Across rivers. Toward the frozen mountains where the dragon waited. The soldiers expected fire. They expected battle. They expected a monster guarding its prey. But when they finally reached the dragon's mountain, what they saw inside the cave would silence the entire army. The Frostfang Mountains were colder than anyone in the army expected. Sharp winds howled through the jagged peaks, carrying snow and ice across the narrow mountain paths. Soldiers wrapped their cloaks tighter as they climbed higher and higher. By the time the army reached the Dragon's Mountain, the sun was beginning to sink behind the distant horizon. General Marcus raised his hand. The marching stopped instantly. Ahead of them, carved into the dark stone of the tallest peak, was a massive cave entrance. The dragon's lair. The air around it felt heavy. Silent. The soldiers gripped their weapons. Form ranks, Marcus ordered quietly. Spears lowered. Shields raised. Archers stepped forward. Behind them, the royal mags whispered ancient spells, faint blue energy glowing around their staffs. King Aldrich rode forward beside the general. "That's where it is," the king said. Marcus nodded. "No doubt." The griffin riders circled above the mountain like silent shadows in the sky, ready to dive if the dragon attempted to escape. Everything was ready. The army of Valerian had come prepared to fight a monster. Marcus slowly drew his sword. "Advance." The soldiers moved carefully toward the cave. Every step echoed against the stone. Snow crunched beneath armored boots. The deeper they moved into the mountain's shadow, the darker the world became. No dragon roared. No fire erupted. Only silence. That silence made the soldiers even more nervous. When they reached the cave entrance, the first line of knights stopped. Marcus stepped forward cautiously. "Hold your positions." He slowly entered the cave. A few of the bravest soldiers followed. The inside of the cave was enormous. Golden light from the setting sun spilled through the entrance, illuminating massive piles of treasure scattered across the stone floor. Gold. Weapons. Ancient relics. The legendary hoard of a dragon. But none of the soldiers cared about the treasure. Because something far more shocking waited at the center of the cave. The dragon. It lay on the stone floor. Still. Quiet. Its massive wings were folded around its body. For a moment, the soldiers thought it might be sleeping. But then someone gasped. "Look." Marcus followed the soldier's gaze. And froze. Curled beside the dragon's massive head was the child. Daniel. The boy lay peacefully against the dragon's neck, fast asleep. One of the dragon's enormous wings was wrapped carefully around him like a blanket. The creature's head rested beside him protectively. The soldiers stared in stunned silence. The boy wasn't tied up. He wasn't injured. He wasn't afraid. He was sleeping. Like a child beside a guardian. King Aldrich stepped into the cave behind the soldiers. "What is taking so long?" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the scene. No one spoke. The dragon slowly opened one golden eye. Its gaze moved across the soldiers standing at the cave entrance. Thousands of armed warriors. Mags ready to unleash spells. Archers with arrows aimed directly at its heart. The creature watched them. But it did not roar. It did not attack. Instead, it gently shifted its wing, carefully adjusting it around the sleeping boy to keep him warm. A murmur spread through the soldiers. "What? Why isn't it fighting?" Marcus slowly lowered his sword. The dragon's eye returned to Daniel. The boy stirred slightly. Then he yawned. Daniel rubbed his eyes and sat up slowly. For a moment, he looked confused. Then he saw the entire army staring at him. "Hi," he said happily. The soldiers looked at each other in disbelief. The king stepped forward cautiously. "Boy, are you hurt?" Daniel shook his head. "No." He smiled and patted the dragon's scales. "She's nice." The entire cave went silent. King Aldrich stared at the enormous creature. "Nice?" The dragon blinked slowly and rested its head on the stone again. Not like a monster. Like something tired. Something calm. The king had come to slay a beast. But what stood before him was something else entirely. And no one in the army knew what to do next. The cave remained completely silent. Thousands of soldiers stood frozen at the entrance, staring at the small boy sitting beside the dragon. Daniel stretched his arms and yawned again, completely unaware of how terrifying the situation looked to everyone else. King Aldrich slowly stepped forward. His armored boots echoed against the stone floor. "Daniel," the king said carefully, recognizing the child from the city. "Come here, son." The boy tilted his head. "Why?" The king hesitated. Behind him, General Marcus whispered, "Your Majesty, the dragon could attack at any moment." But the dragon hadn't moved. It simply watched. Daniel looked back at the dragon, then at the king. "She won't hurt anyone," the boy said. The soldiers shifted uneasily. The king lowered his voice. "Boy, Dragons are dangerous. Daniel shook his head. Not this one. The king frowned. How do you know that? Daniel stood up and walked toward the dragon's head. Several soldiers gasped. But the dragon remained still. The boy gently placed his arms around the creature's massive snout and hugged it. The entire army stopped breathing. She's sad, Daniel said quietly. The king looked confused. Sad. Daniel pointed toward the back of the cave. Marcus followed his finger. That's when the soldiers noticed the nests. Large stone nests lined the cave wall. Every single one of them empty. Broken eggshells were scattered across the floor. The realization slowly spread through the cave. The dragon had lost its children. All of them. The king's expression softened. Daniel looked back at the dragon. She thought I was alone too, he said. The dragon slowly lowered its head beside the boy. Not threatening. Protective. Like a parent standing beside its child. General Marcus finally spoke. So, it didn't steal him. No, Daniel said. She just didn't want to be alone. A deep silence filled the cave. The army of Valerian had marched across mountains expecting to slay a monster. Instead, they had found something very different. A grieving creature. A lonely one. King Aldrich slowly lowered his sword. The sound of metal against stone echoed softly through the cave. No one attacks, the king ordered. The soldiers exchanged surprised looks. But your majesty, Marcus began. The king raised his hand. If this dragon wished to harm us. He gestured toward the thousands of soldiers packed into the cave entrance. We would already be dead. No one argued with that. The dragon slowly lifted its head. Its golden eyes studied the king. For a long moment, the two simply looked at one another. Then Daniel spoke again. Can she stay? The king blinked. You want the dragon to stay? Daniel nodded. She's lonely. The king glanced at the empty nests once more. Then he looked at the enormous creature towering above them all. Finally, King Aldrich sighed. Very well. The soldiers stared in disbelief. The king turned toward the dragon. Dragon of the Frostfang Mountains, he said loudly. You will not harm my people. The dragon blinked slowly. And in return. The king gestured toward the boy. You will not be alone. Daniel grinned widely. Years passed after that day. And the story of the dragon spread across the kingdom. But the story changed. It was no longer about a monster stealing a child. It became the legend of the boy who befriended a dragon. Daniel visited the mountain often as he grew older. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes he simply talked. And slowly, over time, the people of Valerian realized something incredible. The dragon that once terrified the kingdom now protected it. No enemy army ever dared approach the Frostfang Mountains again. Because everyone knew what lived there. A dragon. And the boy who taught it that it didn't have to be alone anymore.